So today we're going to talk about control unclassified information. So control unclassified information is a data category that the United States has that categorizes information that's not classified. So it's still important to the government, but it's not quite at that classified level. And there's several important ways DornerWorks and other organizations like ours can do to safeguard this data. And so if you work for the government, if you interact with the government at all, you need to be aware of at least these requirements. So today we're going to talk about that and what safeguards we can put in place at DornerWorks. And if you're interested in reaching out or using DornerWorks to safeguard your CUI data.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathanael. This is a great topic. How does a company identify CUI data?
That's a great question. So CUI data comes in a variety of different formats. And one of the things that we've done is work on a data flow diagram. Where does that CUI data come into the network? Is it primarily through email? Is it primarily through like a customer share? Is it through mail? So identifying where that data comes into the network, and then how do we control it from there? Trying to figure out, and we'll talk about that too.
So what are some of the standards that are being released to protect this data?
That's a great question too. So the government is in the process of releasing some final clarifications and rulings. Their ruling process takes a while, and there's been some back and forth. So we started with a NIST 800-171 standard, and that's what all the CUI protection is really built on. Actually, the NIST 853, NIST 800-171 comes out of the 853 standard. So we're working on a model called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model, CMMC. And in 2020, we had CMMC, and then it went to CMMC 2.0. So CMMC 2.0 is where we're at now. There are some clarifications being released, hopefully this summer. But where we're at now is there's 3 levels. So level 1 is not necessarily CUI data, but you need to have some controls in place. You work with the government, you need to have some understanding, some controls, some authentication, some password complexity, things like that, some basic controls. Bump up to level 2, that's where we get to today, is CUI data. So that builds off of the NIST 800-171, 110 requirements, and that's the requirements that we're going to talk about today that govern CUI data. Level 3 is a further enhancement of that, and that's more advanced security data classification than even CUI. At DornerWorks, we don't deal with the level 3, we're at the level 2, and part of that is CMMC is going to adopt that you need a third-party verification. So every 3 years, you get verified by a third party that you're meeting that NIST 800-171 standards. And that's really important because it means that a third party comes out, checks and verifies that you're meeting the standard. Before, the DIBCAC would go around, that was the governing body, and do some assessments. CMMC is going to change that and say, everyone that has CUI data now needs to do an assessment if you're at that level 2 standard.
So what are some of the risks of mishandling CUI data?
So some of the risks could be prison time. There's been several cases out there that have explained some of the importance of this. For example, there's been some recent cases where there was some mishandling of CUI data, and some people went to jail or were at best fined very heavily. So prison time, legal action, loss of reputation to an organization, and national security loss. So the importance of control unclassified information is it does have value to the government, either from a privacy government perspective or a threat to national security. So it's really important that we keep that information safe. So that's a few different risks there. And then it really builds on a really good standard of the NIST 800-171. It has some really good controls in place, like two-factor authentication, making sure that you have password complexity, making sure that you have access control to your building, making sure that there's a leaving employee and new employee checklist or process, so that there is a separation of duties. These are some really basic principles of security that is really exciting to see. And how at DornerWorks we've kind of applied that is to say, this is a great approach. It is a government standard, but we're going to see this as an opportunity to really mature in our security. And so that's kind of the approach we've taken.
Well, that's great. It sounds like it could be a complex environment, but it's great that there are experts in the field that, like DornerWorks, that can help companies get off on the right foot with CUI data. Do you have any, closing advice for companies that would like to do more work involving CUI data or understand more about how to work that into their process?
Definitely. So reach out to DornerWorks for sure. And then there's some great blogs out there about CMMC. Summit 7 is one of the leaders in the area that talks about a lot of the conferences and a lot of the different video trainings on this topic. So they're a great resource. We've done a podcast with them in the past. And then just do your research, read the standard. That's really helpful. And I think if you start there, put the time in, you can really get a good grasp of what that data is, and then start applying that to your organization. Do an internal gap analysis. What are we missing at this point? Where are we at today? And then what do we need to do to get to that point of compliance? And then there's a lot of different resources. I know Michigan even, and we've worked with them in the past, has some grants to get a pre-assessment. So check with your local government and different resources out there to see what is available there. And then just do it. Just execute a plan and come up with some processes and just try some things out, and you'll get there to that point.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Nathanael.
Thanks, Matthew.